My son's wife liked to call me the Maid. She didn't know that this maid owned the house she lived in, the car she drove, and the future she took for granted. So I decided to teach her a lesson in property management. I handed her the keys to her new life, and the mortgage bill that came with it. If you believe that respect is earned, not inherited like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the soft clink of ceramic on granite as I stacked another plate. It was well past midnight, and the house, my house, was finally still. The last echoes of laughter from my son Michael and his wife Chloe's friends had long since faded, leaving behind a battlefield of empty wine glasses, smeared plates, and crumpled napkins. They had gone to bed an hour ago, leaving the cleanup to the quiet hum of the dishwasher. And to me, my gaze drifted to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one my late wife Clara always used to occupy. She would have never let the kitchen fall into such a state. This house, every polished floorboard and gleaming countertop, was her masterpiece. Now it felt more like a hotel one, where I was the permanent unpaid staff. The soft padding of footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. Chloe appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She looked at me, then at the half-clean counter, a small, indifferent frown on her lips. "Oh, James," she said, her voice smooth and distant. "You don't have to do that. Just leave it for the cleaning service in the morning." The words were casual, but they landed like tiny, sharp stones. The cleaning service. She said it as if I were a stranger in my own home, a helpful neighbor who had overstayed his welcome. She didn't see a father, a homeowner, the man who built the business that funded the very wine she and her friends had so carelessly enjoyed. She saw a utility. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, turning back to the sink and scrubbing a stubborn wine stain from a crystal glass. The silence that followed was her victory. She filled a glass with filtered water from the refrigerator, took a delicate sip, and disappeared back upstairs without another word. I was left alone with the mess, the memories, and the growing chill of being invisible. A few days later, I was in my study trying to sort through some of Clara's old gardening journals when Michael and Chloe approached me. They wore practiced, earnest expressions that I had come to recognize as the preamble to a request for money. Chloe held a glossy brochure which she placed on my desk with a flourish. It was for the Oakwood Crest Country Club, a place known more for its exorbitant membership fees than its golf course. "Dad." Michael began, his eyes avoiding mine. "Chloe and I were thinking it would be a really great opportunity for my career if we joined." Chloe immediately took over, her voice dripping with calculated enthusiasm. "It's all about networking, James. The people Michael needs to impress are all members there. It's not just an expense, it's an investment in our future, in the family's future." I looked at the fee schedule. The initiation fee alone was more than the down payment I'd made on my first house. I felt a familiar weariness settle over me. It was always an investment, always for the family. But the returns never seemed to materialize. I looked at my son, a man of 35, who still spoke like a boy, asking for a larger allowance. "Michael," I said, my voice level, "are you sure you'll have the time to actually use a membership like this? Your workload seems heavy already." He shifted his weight, fumbling for an answer. "Well, you have to make time for these things, Dad. It's important." Chloe stepped in smoothly, placing a hand on Michael's arm. "Of course he will. We'll make it a priority. Think of the connections, James. The dinners, the events. It will elevate our entire family's standing." I knew it was a pointless argument. Denying them would lead to weeks of pouting, passive aggression, and a strained atmosphere that would make my own home feel like a prison. It was easier to just sign the check. I was paying for peace, not for golf. "All right," I said, pulling my checkbook from the drawer. "I'll take care of the initiation fee." Chloe's face lit up with a triumphant smile. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Thank you, James. You're the best. You won't regret this." Michael mumbled a "thanks, Dad." his relief palpable. As they left the room, I could hear Chloe already on her phone excitedly telling someone the good news. I looked down at the checkbook in my hands. It felt less like a tool of generosity and more like a leash one that they held firmly. The piece I had just purchased felt incredibly expensive. The final straw, the one that broke the quiet foundation of my patience, came a week later. I had spent the afternoon visiting Clara's grave, a quiet ritual that always brought me a measure of comfort. When I returned home, the first thing I noticed was the change in the living room. It was brighter, louder, and emptier. The large custom-built bookshelf that had housed Clara's collection of classic literature, her pride and joy, was gone. In its place, a massive wall-mounted television, at least 80 inches wide, dominated the space. Its screen was black and glossy, reflecting a distorted version of the room, a stranger's room. I stood there, my keys still in my hand, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. My heart started to beat a little faster. I walked over to where the bookshelf used to be, touching the wall, as if to confirm it was real. I could see the faint outlines in the paint, where the shelves had stood for over 30 years. Chloe walked in from the kitchen, humming a tune, a smoothie in her hand. She saw me and smiled brightly, oblivious to the storm gathering inside me. "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing to the television with her glass. "It really opens up the space, doesn't it? Makes it so much more modern and perfect for entertaining." She said it with such casual confidence, as if she had just rearranged some throw pillows. There was no consultation, no discussion, not even a simple heads-up. It was a decree. I didn't answer her right away. I was trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are the books, Chloe?" I finally asked. "Oh," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "They're safe. We moved them down to the storage room in the basement. They were getting a bit dusty anyway, and honestly, nobody was reading them." Nobody was reading them. The words echoed in my head. I looked at her, at this woman who had so effortlessly erased a vital part of my wife, of my history, and replaced it with a soulless black screen. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked down the stairs to the basement. There they were. Clara's books, not carefully packed but stacked haphazardly in dusty cardboard boxes in a dark corner. I ran my hand over the spine of an old copy of Pride and Prejudice, its cover worn from countless readings. In that moment, standing in the cold, dim light of the basement, I knew that the silent war for my own home had begun. And I could no longer afford to be a passive soldier. The dining room was staged for a magazine photo shoot. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the warm, deliberate light of the crystal chandelier above. Every fork, every knife, every water goblet was perfectly aligned. Chloe had insisted on using the wedding china plates with delicate gold rims that we normally saved for Christmas or Easter. A large, artful arrangement of white lilies sat in the center, their heavy, sweet scent filling the air with a funereal perfume. It was a performance of wealth, of perfect domesticity, and I knew my role was not to be the director, but a member of the stage crew. Chloe's parents, Richard and Beverly, sat opposite me. Richard was a man who wore his success like a tailored suit, expensive and a little too tight. He had a firm handshake and an assessing gaze that seemed to calculate the net worth of everything it landed on. Beverly was his perfect counterpart, thin and elegant with meticulously styled hair and a smile that never quite reached her cool blue eyes. They spoke in practiced tones about their recent trip to Tuscany, the trouble they were having with their landscape architect, and the rising price of membership at their yacht club. My son Michael sat beside Chloe, nodding eagerly, laughing a little too loudly at Richard's jokes. He was trying so hard to impress them, to fit into their world of casual opulence. He looked like a boy wearing his father's oversized suit, and in a way he was. He was living in my house, spending my money, all to maintain the illusion that he belonged. I kept quiet for the most part, listening. My role tonight was clear: to be the benevolent, silent patriarch, the foundation upon which Michael and Chloe built their glittering life. I wore a simple pressed shirt and dark trousers, a stark contrast to Richard's designer blazer. I made sure their wine glasses were never empty, rising from my seat to fetch a second bottle of the expensive Cabernet I had bought specifically for the occasion. I cleared the appetizer plates and served the main course, a rack of lamb I had spent the entire afternoon preparing. I did it all with a quiet efficiency that I had honed over decades of caring for my family, of providing without needing acknowledgement. It was what a father, a husband, a host did. It was a language of love I had learned from Clara, a language of action, not words. But I was beginning to realize that to Chloe and her family, it was a language they did not speak, or perhaps chose not to understand. As I moved around the table to refill Beverly's glass, she watched me with a detached curiosity, as if observing an interesting piece of machinery. She took a delicate sip of wine, then turned to Chloe, her voice carrying across the table loud enough for everyone to hear. "It must be so convenient," she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, "having full-time help like this. It frees up so much of your time for the more important things." The words hung in the air for a moment. The comment was ostensibly a compliment to her daughter's lifestyle, but the subtext was clear. She didn't see me as her daughter's father-in-law. She saw me as staff. I saw Michael tense up beside me. He opened his mouth as if to correct her, a flicker of loyalty sparking in his eyes. But then he glanced at Chloe and the flicker died out. He closed his mouth, took a nervous sip of water, and said nothing. That was Chloe's cue. She let out a light musical laugh, the kind she used at cocktail parties to dismiss something trivial. She placed her hand on her mother's arm, a gesture of shared superior understanding. "Oh, no, Mom," she said, her voice bright and utterly casual. "We don't have staff. That's just James." She paused, letting the name hang there, stripped of any familial title. Then came the final fatal blow, delivered with a dismissive wave of her hand and a sweet, condescending smile. "He just helps out around here. You, like the maid." Silence. It fell over the table, not like a blanket, but like a sheet of ice. The soft clinking of silverware stopped. The hum of conversation vanished. In that moment of absolute stillness, all I could hear was the frantic, panicked beating of my own heart. I was frozen in place, the heavy bottle of wine in my hand suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I saw Michael's face turn a deep, mottled red. His eyes were fixed on his plate. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching in his cheek. He was drowning in shame, but he didn't make a sound to save himself, let alone me. Across the table, Richard's thin lips twitched into a barely concealed smirk of amusement. He had witnessed his daughter put the old man in his place, and he approved. My gaze, however, was locked on Chloe. She met my eyes for a split second, and I saw no remorse, no flicker of regret. All I saw was the cold, hard glint of triumph, and then I turned my head and looked at my son. I looked at him, and the anger I expected to feel was not there. It was replaced by something far colder and far heavier, a profound and bottomless disappointment. It was the devastating clarity of seeing your child fail a fundamental test of character, of decency, of love. The boy I had raised, the man I had provided for, was a coward. In that instant, something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. My movements became slow and deliberate. I carefully and with a perfectly steady hand placed the heavy bottle of Cabernet back on the table. The sound it made was the only noise in the room. Then I straightened up to my full height. I looked around the table one last time at the 4 faces staring back at me, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear. I folded my own unused napkin and placed it beside my plate. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. And with that I turned my back on them, on the meal I had cooked, on the son I no longer recognized, and I walked out of the dining room. The silence I left behind was louder than any argument I could have possibly started. I closed the door to my study, and the sound, a soft, definitive click, seemed to separate the world into 2 parts. Out there was the house I no longer recognized, filled with the lingering tension of unspoken words and unforgivable insults. In here was my sanctuary, the one room Chloe had not yet dared to touch. The air smelled of old books, leather, and the faint, lingering scent of the pipe tobacco I hadn't smoked in years. This was the heart of the home, the repository of my life with Clara. And tonight it felt like the last bastion of reality in a world that had become a waking dream of disrespect. I didn't turn on the main overhead light. Instead, I switched on the small green banker's lamp on my desk, casting a warm, focused pool of light on the rich mahogany. My body moved on its own accord, sinking into the familiar comfort of the worn leather armchair, behind the desk a chair that held the faint imprint of my body after thousands of hours spent reading, paying bills, and planning a future that now seemed like a distant fiction. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The furious, hot flush of anger that had risen in me at the dinner table had completely subsided, burned away by the cold, clear shock of betrayal. Anger was a fire wild and consuming. This feeling was different. It was the icy calm that follows a lightning strike, the moment when you see the damage with perfect, horrifying clarity. My eyes fell upon the silver frame on the corner of the desk. It held a picture of Clara taken on our 35th wedding anniversary. She was smiling. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes crinkling at the corners with a genuine joy that could light up a room. We were standing in the garden, the one she had so lovingly cultivated, the one that Chloe now referred to as the yard. I picked up the photograph, the cool metal, a familiar weight in my hand. I looked into my wife's smiling eyes and felt a profound sense of failure. I had made a promise to her, a silent vow on the day we buried her, that I would always look after our son. I thought that meant providing for him, making sure he had every advantage, giving him the stability and security I had worked my entire life to build. But I saw now that my provision had become a poison. My generosity had not been seen as a gift of love, but as an entitlement, an endless resource to be drained. My silence, which I had mistaken for peaceful patience, had been interpreted as weakness. It had been the fertile ground in which Chloe's arrogance and Michael's spinelessness had been allowed to grow, twisting into a thorny vine that was now strangling the very heart of our family. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were desecrating this house, this life, the legacy that Clara and I had built, brick by brick, memory by memory. They had taken her books, her sanctuary, and replaced them with a television. They had taken her husband, her partner, and reduced him to the role of a servant. A decision formed in my mind, not with a crash, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the Earth's surface. This was not about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional indulgence. This was about restoring order. This was about consequences. It was about teaching a lesson that Michael, in all his years of expensive education, had clearly never learned, that every action has a reaction, that respect is a currency more valuable than money, and that you cannot take a foundation for granted without risking the collapse of the entire structure. I placed Clara's photograph gently back on the desk, facing it toward me. I was no longer a victim in my own home. I was its protector. My movements became deliberate, filled with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I stood up and walked to the wall of bookshelves, running my hand along the spines until I found a thick, leather-bound volume of Shakespeare. I pulled it forward, and with a soft click, a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing the dull gray steel of a wall safe. I spun the combination lock, the familiar clicks echoing in the quiet room. The heavy bolt disengaged with a satisfying thud, and I pulled the steel door open. Inside there was no cash, no jewelry. There was only paper. But paper, I knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. I removed the thick document folders one by one and carried them to my desk. I spread them out under the warm lamplight, the original deed to the house signed in my name and Clara's 40 years ago. The paid-in-full mortgage certificate. The property tax records for the last 2 decades. The detailed statements from my investment portfolios. The corporate filings for the business I had sold, the source of the wealth they so carelessly enjoyed. It was all there, a lifetime of hard work, prudent decisions, and financial independence laid bare on the mahogany. This was the truth. This was reality. And it was a reality from which they had become dangerously detached. I sat down, pulled a blank yellow legal pad towards me, and picked up my favorite fountain pen. The time for silent endurance was over. The time for a silent, calculated response had just begun. The law offices of Reed and Associates were not on a high floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. They were housed in a beautifully restored 3-story brownstone, a building that spoke of stability, history, and quiet confidence. The interior was much the same, filled with dark wood shelves of thick legal books and the hushed, serious air of a place where important decisions were made. Evelyn Reed herself was the embodiment of this atmosphere. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind classic tortoiseshell glasses and silver hair cut in a no-nonsense style. She had been my lawyer for over 20 years, handling the sale of my business, drafting my will, and setting up the trust for Clara. She was more than just an attorney. She was a trusted advisor, a mind as precise and reliable as a Swiss watch. I sat across from her at a large, uncluttered conference table. I didn't begin with the emotion of the previous night. I began with the facts. I recounted the years of escalating financial demands, the slow erosion of my autonomy in my own home, and the gradual transformation of my role from father to financier. I told her about the country club membership, the replacement of Clara's books, and I finished with a calm, detailed account of the dinner party. I repeated Chloe's words exactly as she had said them. She called me the Maid. I let the words hang in the quiet air of her office. Evelyn listened without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin, her gaze never leaving my face. She was absorbing the information, not as a friend would with sympathy, but as a lawyer would, identifying the core of the issue. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I see," she said, her voice even. "This is not a sudden grievance, James. This is the culmination of a long-term pattern of financial and emotional exploitation." She turned to her computer, her fingers clicking quietly on the keyboard. A moment later, my entire financial life was displayed on the large monitor on the wall. "Let's review the assets in question," she said, her tone shifting from listening to strategic analysis. "Primary residence at 24 Maple Drive. The title is in your name, James Peterson, and in the name of the late Clara Peterson. The title is clean. There are no liens, no encumbrances, and no mortgage. The last county appraisal valued the property at $1.2 million. She continued, highlighting different lines on the screen. "Property taxes for the last 10 years have been paid on time from your personal account. All major utilities, home insurance, and significant repairs, including the new roof in 2022, were also paid directly by you. Correct?" I nodded. "Correct." She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "And to be clear, this property and its associated costs are entirely separate from your primary investment portfolio, which is held in a revocable trust. A trust to which your son Michael is a beneficiary, but over which he has absolutely no control until your passing." "That is also correct," I confirmed. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "All right," she said. "The facts are clear. Your financial position is ironclad. Now tell me, James, what is your desired outcome?" This was the crucial question. "I want them to have the house," I said, and I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "But," I continued, "I want them to understand its value. Not its market value, but its true cost. I want to protect the capital that Clara and I worked our entire lives to build. I will not allow her legacy to be squandered by their entitlement." Evelyn absorbed this, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across her face. This was a problem she could solve. This was a puzzle she could piece together. "An elegant objective," she murmured, turning back to her screen. "Giving someone exactly what they want is often the most effective lesson. There is a legal and financial pathway to achieve this. It's clean, it's completely above board, and it's irreversible. She spun the monitor so I could see it more clearly. The house as it stands is a dormant asset. It's over $1 million of equity just sitting there. The first step is to leverage that equity. She pointed to a section on financial instruments. You will apply for a home equity line of credit, or HELOC. Given your credit and the value of the property, you'll be easily approved for a credit line of up to 80% of the home's value. That's approximately $960,000. You will draw the entire amount and deposit it into a new bank account in your name only. This is the most important step. The cash must be secured before anything else happens. She let that sink in before continuing. Once the funds are safely in your possession, we move to step 2. We will file a quitclaim deed. It's a very simple legal document. It transfers your interest in the property directly to Michael and Chloe. It makes no warranties or promises about the property's condition or any existing debts against it. You are simply and legally washing your hands of it. They will be the proud official owners of a $1.2 million home. She paused for dramatic effect, her sharp eyes meeting mine. Now for step 3, the consequence. The $960,000 loan you took out is not tied to you personally. It is secured by the property itself. It's a lien that follows the title. So when the title transfers to them, the lien transfers with it. They will receive the keys to their dream house, and a few weeks later, they will receive their first mortgage statement. They will either have to pay it, or the bank will initiate foreclosure proceedings and take the house. They will be given exactly what they wanted, along with the responsibility they never once considered. I looked at the plan laid out before me. It was not a weapon of anger. It was an instrument of pure, cold logic. It was a perfectly balanced scale, forcing them to weigh the true cost of their desires. It was a lesson in reality, delivered not with a shout, but with a signature on a piece of paper. It was, as she had said, elegant. "Evelyn," I said, my voice steady and firm, "that is a perfect solution. Please draw up the necessary paperwork. Let's proceed." The week that followed was a study in quiet movement. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confrontations. The currents of my life were shifting, but on the surface the water remained deceptively still. Michael and Chloe were busy with their new country club membership, their evenings filled with social engagements, and their days with a self-satisfied glow. They barely noticed my comings and goings, and that suited my purpose perfectly. I moved through the house like a ghost, a silent observer preparing for his departure. My first destination was the downtown branch of a major bank, a cold, impersonal cathedral of commerce with marble floors and hushed tones. I was led into a glass-walled office where a young, eager loan officer presented me with a stack of papers nearly an inch thick. He explained the terms of the home equity line of credit with a professionally rehearsed speech pointing to signature lines and initial boxes. I listened patiently, though I already knew every detail. My mind was not on his words, but on the weight of the pen in my hand. It was a simple ballpoint, but it felt as heavy as a judge's gavel. I began to sign. My signature, the one I had used on countless contracts and business deals, flowed onto the page firm and unwavering. Page after page, the same 2 words, James Peterson, a name that was now being leveraged to reclaim its own meaning. I did not rush. I read the fine print not out of doubt, but out of a deep understanding that this was a contract with my own future. When the last page was signed, I pushed the stack of documents back across the polished desk. The young man smiled, relieved. He saw a simple financial transaction. I saw the first turn of a key in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. 2 days later, I was back in Evelyn Reed's office. The atmosphere here was different. It was not the cold impersonality of the bank, but the warm, quiet dignity of old wood and trusted counsel. Evelyn didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single, deceptively simple document across the conference table. It was the quitclaim deed. My eyes scanned the legal language, the formal phrases that would sever a 40-year bond. All my right title and interest. To the property commonly known as 24 Maple Drive. Do hereby release and forever quit claim. It was a legal farewell, a formal letting go. I picked up the pen. Evelyn offered a heavy fountain pen that felt more appropriate for the occasion. There was no hesitation. My signature on this document was a final act of release. I was not just signing away a house. I was signing away a burden I had carried for too long. Evelyn watched me, her expression unreadable but for a flicker of deep respect in her eyes. She took the document, affixed her notary seal, and pressed down firmly. The crisp, percussive sound of the embosser stamping the paper was the only sound in the room. It felt like a verdict being rendered. That evening, I began to pack. Back at the house, I moved with a quiet purpose. I did not pack clothes from the closet or dishes from the kitchen. I was not interested in the things Chloe had bought or the furniture she had rearranged. My task was to curate a life, to distill 40 years of love and memory into a few small cardboard boxes. I went to the study first. I carefully wrapped the silver-framed photograph of Clara in soft tissue paper and placed it at the bottom of a box, the foundation. I went down to the cold basement and found the boxes of her books. I did not take all of them. I chose 3, her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver, with her notes in the margins, and a thick gardening almanac she had consulted every spring. From my desk I took my father's old gold watch and the fountain pen I had used to sign the deed. I packed my journals filled with the quiet observations of a long and contented life. Each item was a story, a piece of a puzzle that Chloe and Michael had never bothered to solve. As I taped the last box shut, the sound ripped through the silence of the house. It was the sound of an ending and the sound of a beginning. In a closet upstairs, I knew there was a new suitcase waiting. I had already rented a clean, bright apartment downtown with a view of the city skyline. Everything, absolutely everything, was now in place. I called them on Saturday morning. My voice over the phone was calm and even, betraying none of the seismic shifts that had occurred within me. I requested their presence for a family meeting on Sunday afternoon. I used the word meeting, a formal corporate term that was intentionally out of place for a family discussion. It was a signal that the old rules no longer applied. I could hear the curiosity and suspicion in Chloe's voice, but they agreed to be there. I'm sure they spent the next 24 hours speculating, convincing themselves that my cold departure from the dinner party had shocked me into submission, that I was finally ready to formally offer them the house to secure my place in their lives. Their greed had always made them predictable. They arrived at precisely 3 o'clock. I was waiting for them in the living room, the room that now felt like a stage. I had turned off the enormous television, its black screen reflecting their distorted images as they walked in. I was sitting in my old armchair, the one that had been Clara's favorite. It placed me opposite the sofa, creating a space between us that felt both physical and symbolic. They sat down, their posture a mixture of feigned concern and barely concealed anticipation. Chloe arranged herself carefully on the sofa, smoothing her expensive dress. Michael just looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. "Thank you for coming." I began, my voice quiet but carrying in the still air. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week. About the future, about legacy, and about this house." At the mention of the house, I saw them exchange a quick, triumphant glance. It was the look of 2 people who believed their check was about to arrive. Chloe leaned forward slightly, her face a mask of sincerity. "We were so worried about you, James," she said, her voice soft. "We're glad you're ready to talk." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, before continuing, ignoring the transparent lie. "I've come to a decision," I said. "A decision that I believe is best for everyone." My movements were slow, deliberate. I leaned forward and placed 2 items on the polished surface of the coffee table that separated us. The first was a single shiny brass key to the front door. The second was a thick, heavy manila folder filled with documents. Their eyes were immediately drawn to the key, a simple object that represented the ultimate prize. "This house," I said, my voice steady, "has been my home for over 40 years. Clara and I built a life here, but a house is meant for the living for the future. And you two are the future of this family." I paused, letting them absorb the weight of my words. "And so," I concluded, "the house is now yours." A dazzling, genuine smile broke across Chloe's face. It was the first honest expression I had seen from her in years. She let out a small, victorious laugh and reached across the table, snatching the key. "Oh, James," she breathed, her eyes shining. "Thank you. We won't let you down. I knew you'd see things our way." She held the key in her palm as if it were a precious jewel, already imagining herself as the true mistress of the manor. Michael looked visibly relieved, a wave of ease washing over his tense features. "Dad, this is incredible," he stammered. They were so lost in their victory, they barely noticed, as I used my index finger to slide the thick manila folder across the table towards them. "Of course," I said, my tone shifting from paternal to practical. "As the new homeowners, there are a few formalities and responsibilities you'll need to be aware of." Chloe was still admiring the key and barely paid attention, but Michael, ever the more cautious one, hesitantly reached for the folder. He unfastened the clasp and pulled out the top document. I watched his face as he read it. I saw the flicker of confusion, the slight furrow of his brow as he tried to process the numbers. He looked at the official bank letterhead, then at the astronomical figure printed next to the words, "Payment due." "What is this?" he asked, his voice a confused murmur. Chloe finally looked over, her triumphant expression fading as she saw the document in Michael's hand. "A mortgage statement," she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That can't be right. You paid off this house before I was even born." "That is correct," I said calmly. "I did. The house was owned free and clear, which is what made it such a valuable asset." I leaned back in my chair, my part in the physical action now complete. It was time for the truth. Last week I visited the bank and took out a new loan against the property, a home equity mortgage for $960,000. The color drained from Chloe's face. Michael looked as if he had been punched in the stomach. "That money," I continued, my voice clear and precise, "has been transferred into a private retirement fund in my name only. It will ensure that I am financially secure for the rest of my life without needing to rely on anyone." After the funds were secured, I met with Evelyn. I signed a quitclaim deed legally transferring the title of this property and all its associated liabilities to the two of you. Michael shook his head, refusing to understand. "But what does that mean?" It was Chloe who grasped the cold, hard reality first. Her voice was a horrified whisper. "The loan, the mortgage is attached to the house." "Precisely," I affirmed. "The bank's lien follows the title. As the new legal owners of this $1.2 million property, you are also the proud owners of its $960,000 debt." "This," I said, pointing to the paper in Michael's trembling hand, "is your first monthly payment, $7,200. It's due on the 1st of next month, in 3 weeks' time. I trust you'll make arrangements." They sat in stunned, horrified silence. The brass key lay forgotten on the table between them, its shine now looking cheap and mocking. I wasn't finished. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out several more envelopes, placing them on the table next to the mortgage bill, fanning them out like a losing hand of cards. "And of course there are the other costs of home ownership. This is the quarterly property tax bill. That's just under $6,000. And here are the latest bills for electricity, water, and gas. I've already contacted the utility companies to have the accounts transferred into your names. My automatic payments have been canceled." I finally stood up. The meeting was over. I had said everything that needed to be said. I walked over to the coat rack by the door and put on my jacket. I looked back at them, two frozen figures in a tableau of shattered dreams. They were surrounded by the beautiful things in my home, things they had coveted for so long, and they were finally beginning to understand that they were trapped by them. I looked at the key on the table one last time. A homeowner has a responsibility to care for their property, I said, my voice clear and final. And as of today, the maid is quitting. I turned, opened the front door, and walked out into the cool afternoon air without looking back. I left them in the suffocating silence of their new house with nothing but a worthless key and a mountain of bills that was now theirs to climb. For a long time after the front door clicked shut, neither of us moved. We were statues in a museum of our own ruin, frozen in the positions we held when the world had ended. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a mundane noise that seemed obscene in the face of such total devastation. The pile of papers sat on the coffee table like a funeral pyre, the brass key glinting under the afternoon sun. It was no longer a key to a kingdom. It was the key to a cage. It was Chloe who broke the silence. Her voice was not a cry or a whisper. It was a low, venomous hiss, the sound of a snake coiling to strike. "Well," she said, her eyes fixed on the door my father had just walked through. "Aren't you going to do something, or are you just going to sit there like you always do?" I looked at her. Her face, usually so perfectly composed, was a twisted mask of fury and disbelief. This was not the plan. The plan was a life of effortless luxury, of country clubs and European vacations, all funded by a quiet old man who knew his place. "Do something," I finally said, my own voice sounding strange to my ears, thin and reedy. "What is there to do, Chloe? Did you not hear him? He's gone. The money is gone." She sprang up from the sofa, her movements sharp and violent. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Your fault. He is your father. You were supposed to manage him. Instead, you just let him serve you drinks while my parents were here. You just sat there and let me handle it, you weak, spineless coward." The word coward struck me, and for the first time in our relationship, something inside me snapped. The fear that had paralyzed me for years was suddenly burned away by a white-hot surge of anger. "My fault!" I shouted, getting to my feet to face her. "You think this is my fault? I wasn't the one who called him the maid, Chloe. That was you, all you. Was it worth it? Was that one little moment of feeling superior to my father worth all of this?" I gestured wildly around the room, at the furniture she had picked out, at the 80-inch television that had replaced my mother's memory. "This is what you wanted. This house, this lifestyle you pushed, and you pushed, and you were too arrogant and too greedy to ever think he might just push back." Her face went pale with rage. "Greedy," she spat. "You call me greedy? Who was it that wanted the new sports car? Who was it that signed the lease on a car you knew we couldn't afford? You loved the money just as much as I did Michael. The only difference is I was willing to do what it took to get it, while you were just happy to ride on your daddy's coattails." The ugly truth of her words silenced me for a moment. She was right. I had been a willing participant, a silent partner in the slow, steady bleeding of my father's generosity. The fight drained out of me, replaced by the cold, heavy dread of our reality. I sank back onto the sofa, my head in my hands. The anger was gone, and only the terror remained. I picked up the mortgage statement again, staring at the number. $7,200. It felt like a fictional sum from a different universe. I did the math, the simple, brutal arithmetic of our lives. My salary, which had always felt so substantial, was a joke compared to this. After our credit card bills, our 2 car payments, and our ridiculously expensive lifestyle, we were left with almost nothing. We were living on a financial cliff edge, and my father had just kicked away the ground beneath our feet. "We can't pay this," I said, my voice hollow. "Chloe, we can't pay it. We can't even make the first payment." She was still standing, but the fight had gone out of her too. She looked around the beautiful sunlit living room as if seeing it for the first time. She saw the designer sofa, the silk curtains, the imported rug. But now she wasn't seeing luxury. She was seeing debt. She was seeing a monthly payment that was more than our combined incomes could possibly cover. The beautiful house had transformed into a prison of debt. Every elegant feature, every modern upgrade was just another bar on the window. The life she had so carefully constructed was a house of cards, and my father had just pulled out the single card, holding it all up. She slowly sank onto the sofa opposite me, her body deflating. The fight was over. There was no one left to blame. There was only the cold, hard, inescapable truth. "So what do we do?" she whispered, the arrogance completely gone from her voice, replaced by the thin, brittle sound of fear. I looked at the mortgage statement, then at the quarterly tax bill, then at the key on the table. There was only one answer. "We have to sell," I said. "We have to sell the house." And we sat there in the crushing silence, two strangers in a home that had never truly been ours. My new apartment is smaller than the living room of my old house, but it feels infinitely larger. It is a space defined not by what it contains, but by what it lacks. There is no tension, no unspoken resentment, no feeling of being a guest in my own life. Sunlight pours through a large picture window, illuminating the clean lines of simple, functional furniture and the dust motes dancing in the air. From here on, the 15th floor, the city spreads out below me, a vast and intricate map of other lives, other stories. It gives me a sense of perspective I had lost. My few precious boxes have been unpacked. Clara's photograph has pride of place on my desk, her smile a constant warm presence. Her favorite books rest on a small handcrafted shelf next to my reading chair. These are the things that matter. The rest, the expensive furniture, the cavernous rooms, the perfectly manicured lawn, I do not miss at all. I had mistaken the vessel for the treasure it was meant to hold. Now I have the treasure, and the vessel is someone else's problem. I spend my mornings in a state of productive peace. I am not idle. I am building something new. Spread across my desk are not bills or bank statements, but the legal documents for establishing a charitable foundation. The Clara Peterson Memorial Scholarship, it will be called. It will provide funds for young, aspiring students who want to study landscape architecture, Clara's first love. The money that I extracted from the house, the capital that had become a source of such ugliness and greed, will now be transformed. It will become a garden planting seeds of opportunity in the lives of strangers, a legacy of growth and beauty that will honor her far more than an empty, silent house ever could. The ringing of my phone cut through the quiet afternoon. I looked at the screen and saw Michael's name. A month had passed since the meeting, a month of complete and total silence. I felt no anxiety, no dread. I simply felt a quiet curiosity. I let it ring one more time, a small assertion of my new pace of life, and then I answered. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice calm. I listened. His voice on the other end was thin-strained, stripped of all its former confidence. It was the voice of a man who had hit rock bottom. I listened to his halting explanations, his litany of woes, his talk of real estate agents and lowball offers, and the crushing weight of debt. I did not interrupt. I just listened to the predictable, inevitable consequences of his choices. There was a long, painful pause on his end, and then came the question I knew was coming. A desperate, mumbled plea for help, for a bailout, for me to fix the mess they had made. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the endless sky. "I understand," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It sounds like you are in a very difficult position." I let another silence stretch, forcing him to absorb the finality of his situation. And then I gave him my answer, the one that would define our relationship from this day forward. "Yes, son," I said. "My door is always open to you, but this time you will enter as a guest, not as an owner." I heard a shaky breath on the other end, the sound of a man finally understanding the new rules of the world. After a moment, I said my goodbyes and ended the call. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel a thrill of victory. The satisfaction I felt was deeper, quieter, more profound. I stood at the window watching the distant flow of traffic, the endless motion of the city. What I had done was not an act of revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes the person who wields it. This had been an act of restoration. It was like finding a beautiful old clock that was telling the wrong time, and instead of smashing it, I had simply opened it up carefully, cleaned the gears, and set the hands to the correct time. I had reset the moral compass of my own family. I had not destroyed my son. I had given him the opportunity, however painful, to finally become a man, to stand on his own 2 feet, and face the consequences of his actions. I had protected Clara's legacy, transforming it from a source of entitlement into a force for good. And I had reclaimed my own dignity, not by shouting, but by making a quiet, deliberate choice. Order had been restored, and in that restoration, I had finally found my peace. This story taught me a profound lesson. Peace purchased with dignity is no peace at all. For years, I absorbed disrespect, believing my silence was preserving family harmony. I was wrong. My silence was not a shield. It was a fertilizer, allowing entitlement to grow where gratitude should have been. The hardest lesson was realizing that sometimes the most loving act is to create a necessary conflict. Setting firm boundaries is not about building walls, but about teaching others the value of the door. True strength isn't found in enduring endless disrespect. It's found in calmly and decisively teaching others how you deserve to be treated. What did you think of the lesson Chloe and Michael learned? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of quiet strength, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories.